Hello and welcome to this next section of this course, Building and Deploying Cloud-Native Applications. In this section, you will learn the process of migrating or hosting a Java Spring Boot application in the Azure cloud. We'll start by building a Java Spring Boot application. This application will use Azure Cosmos DB to persist its data. Azure Cosmos DB is Microsoft's globally distributed multi-model database. And finally, we will deploy this Spring Boot sample application to Azure App Service. Just a few words about this application. It is a simple to-do application which is capable of tracking your upcoming tasks. You can add new tasks to the application, and when you're done with a particular task, you can mark it as done. This sample Java Spring Boot application provides an end-to-end functionality for keeping track of your to-do items. With the help of this application, you can execute CRUD operations on your list of to-do items. The front end of this Vibe application is written using Angular.js. The back end for this application uses Azure Cosmos DB to persist the data. So the entire tech stack for this application consists of Java Spring Boot, Angular.js, Cosmos DB, Document DB, and of course, Azure. The steps we will follow to deploy this Spring Boot application will be identical for virtually any Java Spring Boot applications you're working on. In this video, build a Spring Boot Java application which will provide CRUD functionality for a to-do list. You'll walk through the deployment steps using the command line as well as the Azure portal. Before proceeding further, please make sure you have deployed the Azure VM and installed the prerequisite software on it. As we go through these demos, you can follow along. So as you are executing the commands, you can pause the video to refer to the commands being executed, and you can replicate the same in your environment as well. All the subsequent build and deploy steps will also be shared with you in the accompanying course resources. The first step here is to set up a new Cosmos DB in the Azure cloud. We will do so with the help of Azure CLI. This will involve 3 simple steps. First, we will launch and log in into our Azure CLI and set our default Azure subscription. Next, we'll create a new Azure resource group using the Azure CLI. And finally, we will deploy a new Cosmos DB within the Azure resource group created in one of the previous steps. So without further ado, let's jump into the exciting world of cloud-native applications. Here, I have logged into the VM we deployed earlier in the Azure cloud. Open a command line window. Here we will use the Azure CLI commands to connect to our Azure subscription and deploy the required resources. Once you've installed the Azure CLI, the Azure specific commands will be available for you to use on the command line. Let's start by logging into the Azure subscription. Execute the command az-login. This will open the browser window where you need to enter your Azure credentials to log into the Azure portal. When you're trying to log into the Azure portal for the first time, this process may take a few minutes. Once you have successfully logged in, you'll be able to see the list of subscriptions associated with your Microsoft account. Pick the account associated with your Azure subscription. Here, if you've already logged in, your browser may have the cached login token available, or it may prompt you to enter the password to authenticate yourself. In this case, I have already logged into my Azure subscription, so I was able to successfully authenticate myself. We got a confirmation message that we have successfully logged in, so we can close this browser window now. Let's switch to the Azure CLI command prompt window. Here, Azure CLI has logged into the Azure account, and as you can see, a list of all valid Azure subscriptions associated with this account are listed here. Now, in your case, you may only have a single Azure subscription associated with your account, but if you have multiple subscriptions like I do, you need to select a default subscription under which all the subsequent resources will be created. All the costs associated with running these cloud resources will be billed to the selected subscription. In this case, I will pick this subscription called Visual Studio Enterprise 02. In order to set this subscription as my default subscription, I need to copy the ID of this subscription. Let's highlight the subscription ID starting with 612 and copy it. To set a default subscription for our Azure CLI, we will execute the command az-account set -S. And here we need to input the ID of the subscription. So paste that. And after typing in your command like so, execute it. And now our default Azure subscription has been set for Azure CLI. An Azure subscription is a logical construct that groups together resource groups and their resources. Now let's go ahead and create a new Azure resource group. Execute the command azgroup-create -n, followed by the name of the resource group. Let's give it an easy to remember name, section 2-CNAJ, which stands for Cloud Native Azure with Java. We also need to specify an Azure location for this resource group. We can specify the location using the input parameter -l, and then pick a suitable Azure location. In this case, we will pick East US. After inputting the command like so, let's execute it. And here you go. The resource group was successfully created and Azure CLI responds with this output. You can see the identifier assigned to this new resource group. You can also see the provisioning state has succeeded, which further verifies that our resource group was successfully deployed. Make sure you take note of the name and ID of this resource group because you will need these details later while deploying other Azure resources. As discussed earlier, each Azure resource group is simply a logical construct that groups multiple resources together so that they can be managed as a single entity. For example, resources that share a similar lifecycle, which are part of an N-tier application. Anyway, we have set the default subscription under which we created a resource group in East US location.